Hi, I'm Dan Costa, Editor-in-Chief of PCMag.com, and welcome to Fast Forward, where we have ongoing conversations about living in the future. Thanks so much for joining us today. We have a great guest for you. Today we're talking to Ellen Ullman. I will hold up the book. Her new book is called Life in Code. It's a series of essays beginning in 1994 when she was a programmer in Silicon Valley. She now makes her living writing mostly fiction, but she remains a keen observer of Silicon Valley, of the tech industry, and really about how the tools we make are changing us on a daily basis. Ellen, thanks so much for stopping by the lab.
It is my pleasure to be here.
So your programming roots go back quite a ways. In 1978, you were an English major who decided to make the switch into programming. Why would you do something like that?
Well, I went through video. I got involved with a group doing video. The Sony Portapack was one of those machines like the PC. These things that had been controlled by behemoth corporations suddenly were in your own hands. You could make your own videos, your own stories. You could go around and show them. There weren't restrictions. You could do porn, etc. And it was a very exciting time, and I learned that I liked working with machines, that the possibility of working with these machines to do social change and art was intriguing. Eventually, I left Ithaca to go to San Francisco. One must leave the college town or become pitiful. And I one day was walking on Market Street, and there in the window of dearly departed Radio Shack was the TRS-80, affectionately known as the Trash 80. And I thought, oh, is this anything like a Portapack? You know, what can you do with this thing? Can you make art? Social activism? So on an impulse, I bought it. And then there was the issue of programming. It's a little harder than getting started with a Portapack, press a button. But I found it difficult, but the good difficult, intriguing. And I think that's anyone who wants to go into software engineering has to feel, yeah, this is hard, but also the pleasure of the hunt. If there isn't some sense of seduction about solving problems, it's going to be a very unhappy experience.
And people today don't quite understand that back then when you buy a TRS-80 at Radio Shack, it doesn't do a lot. Like, you have to make it do things. You have to learn how to use it. And that's sort of the invitation that you took it up on.
Yeah, there's a blank screen. It was already an obsolete television at the time. You had a keyboard, and you recorded programs on a reel-to-reel cassette. And I think it held maybe 4K. That was the maximum program size. And it had BASIC built into it, the BASIC language. And I don't know if people know the difference between interpreted and compiled language. Interpreted means it just executes it right in front of you. So you enter 2 plus 2, and it shows you 4. That's easy, getting the first little things going. But then doing anything significant, very difficult, especially since BASIC, early BASIC had many traps. You could say go to, but it didn't automatically go back. So you could lose your way in a tangle, and it was known as spaghetti code. Again, it was frustrating and intriguing.
I feel when I was looking through the book and you talk about those early years, what strikes me is the people that you were working with, it almost seems like more like a ragtag collection of artists than engineers and hardcore programmers. Can you talk a little bit about the esprit de corps, or the people you were working with?
Yeah, I mean, if you look back, you know who Stuart Brand is, the Whole Earth Electronic Catalog, the Well, which I still have an email address there. I will be there as long as the Well exists. That was one of the first online communities. And the people attracted to it, you know, John Markoff's book, What the Dormouse Saw?
Sure.
He, stoners and dropouts and people who were just crazies and what do you do with this stuff? And that was the atmosphere that drew me in, like the Portapack. These were people having fun, exploring. And the first people I worked with when I had to take a job and earn a living were like that also. A former Sufi dancer, a woman in all but dissertation in art history, some guy from France who smoked Gauloise, though smoking was not permitted, and he'd say, a computer never, told me to stop smoking, and they're the kind of people we work with. And somewhere around I'd say the 83 to 86, it changed. Computer science became a sort of common degree, software engineering, and we were joined by a group, heavily male, self-selected group who had studied computer science as an undergraduate degree. And the atmosphere completely changed. People were harder to talk to. In my experience, were not as well-rounded. That is a very broad generalization. I worked with men who were very well-rounded, could quote Shakespeare with the best of them. So, but the whole atmosphere changed. I guess it's because the profession had to lose its innocence. And how could we stay a bunch of children?
Became professionalized and so
Right,
forth.
right.
If you've got questions for Ellen Ullman and you're watching live on Facebook now, you can leave those questions in the comments section. We'll answer them live. If you're listening to this afterwards on YouTube or as a podcast, obviously we cannot answer your questions in real time. But feel free to leave a comment anyway, and we'll try and get to them then. Actually, we have a question now.
How were you inspired to do coding?
How were you inspired to do coding? Yeah.
Well, again, it was, wow, what is this? And when I got my first real program running, there was a rush of pleasure. Wow, it works. I did that. It went from nothing to something. And it was like the first time I fixed a carburetor. You know, take things apart, you put them back together, and car starts, right? So I thought, this is a rare pleasure, and it's hard to get to. And so once I had that feeling, I knew it was a little bit like a drug, you know? You got that high, and then then you lose it, and then you get it back, or you try to.
You talk a lot about this in the book, is that you don't sugarcoat it and tell people that, everybody should learn how to code because it's not that hard. You say everybody should learn how to code because it is hard. And that difficulty is eventually going to be your sense of satisfaction that you get from it.
I'm not telling everyone to learn to code. As I said, people need to be exposed to it. And the point is to demystify code. We are surrounded by algorithms that control us, and this is no news to anybody who just got hacked by Equifax, for instance, 1/3 of the adult population of the United States. So the point is to know enough that it's written by people and it can be changed by people. And there is a councilman in the Bronx, forgive me if I've forgotten his name, who is proposing a bill there that the borough looks at all the algorithms that they're using, and they go from police assignments to garbage pickup schedules to what school the kids go to, and looking for bias in them. And this is the process that I'm hoping for, that people in the general public begin to see that these things can be changed. They have bias, and that bias can be addressed.
So this brings us to one of your major points, which is that the code itself contains biases and content, and I think with algorithms it takes it to a whole different level. But even coding itself comes with certain, depending on who wrote the code, it'll reflect certain political biases, cultural biases. Can you just talk a little bit about how that gets embedded into the code itself?
Well, software engineers don't determine what code will get written. This comes from the top. And the people at the top are very rich, overwhelmingly white men, and their desire is what they think is great for society or what the assignments are. For instance, a simple delivery app, selected zip codes. What does that mean? Oh, we can't make money with those people of marginal incomes. Oh, we don't want to send cars up there. Who's going to drive up to Harlem, right? That's a simple example. It goes into, is it all shopping? Is that what people need, is shopping? I mean, what kind of social viewpoint does that express? It's all the way down to algorithms, and even deeper than that. I just read a paper by Philip Rogaway, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, I hope. He delivered it in 2015, and it's about the moral implications of cryptography. And he talks about cryptography as power. For whom are you writing it? For what are they using it? And so you can see from the simplest app down to the very bottom of what is considered mathematical, the bias is built in.
I think that what's interesting is that I think you put your finger on it when you talk about is it all shopping? Because it's certainly all motivated by commerce now. And the reason you target certain zip codes is because you can make money in those zip codes. And then that shapes the product, and then it becomes this reinforcing cycle. That same thing happens with every industry. There's a reason why Amazon bought Whole Foods and not Stop and Shop. And it's because of those demographic biases, and that's just the market at work.
Right.
But those market forces are pretty much determining the technological development as well now.
I have an example of something I think is just wonderful. There was a group, and we're talking about, this is coding from the ground up. No, people are not sitting in their glass enclosed spaces at WeWork deciding that I'm a nonprofit and this will benefit society and change the world. This is a group working on the ground with undocumented laborers. Now, these guys stand on the street corner and they get picked up on someone in a pickup truck or a van, and then they're dropped off later, and some of them don't get paid. So they're thinking, how can we signal among each other, don't get into this, this is a bad guy. It's something like the Depression era. Hobos used to put these signs and say, you know, a bad man lives here, a kind woman lives here. And so they approached a group. Again, it came to the coders from the ground and said, can you build us something? Most of these guys have mobile apps that keeps the anonymity, of course, and they can put in this license plate, you look for that and don't take the job. Now, to me, does anyone make money? Eventually, yes, because these people who are kind of desperate for work are not cheated as much. I mean, you can look at it from the ground up like that.
It's like
I'm naive, but ever hopeful.
It's like a reputation system, the same type of reputation system that's built into Uber, where riders get rated and drivers get rated, and then ideally, the best drivers and the best riders get rewarded in some way. It's a fascinating example. We have another question from the audience.
Do you have any advice for people that are new to coding or looking to explore it as a career option?
Advise people looking to explore it. First of all, there are meetups everywhere. No, I shouldn't say everywhere. They are in selected zip codes also. There are thousands and thousands in the Bay Area where you can sign up and meet with other people who will teach you to code. There are some for women, especially. That is very helpful. I did a search for other places in the country, Buffalo, New York, Utica, New York, and there was nothing. So what do we do with that? So massively online courses seem a possibility. And one of the things that I wrote about and what I did was enroll, audit it, and I saw all the same bias in the teachers. They were making assumptions about American culture and, well, you want to earn $1 billion, $1 million wouldn't be enough for you. All the same, I think people can download these videos, get a group together, stick the tongue out at the guy who's telling you social nonsense, and help each other learn to code. There are also code academies that cost thousands of dollars, and they're actually closing. They guarantee people you'll earn 3 figures within 8 months. I don't think that's a good route. Ideally, schools would teach it. And I don't mean that coding joins the humanities as a basic literacy. I think that people with humanities need to look into coding, to bring that knowledge of people who studied history and sociology and foreign languages, how other people live in the world, bring that into the coding arena.
I want to talk to you a little bit about social media. Back in 1998, you wrote an essay called The Museum of Me, which you're on a new book tour now, and I hear this phrase being bandied about as if it was brand new. But you first wrote it in 1998, and you said that the internet was going to enable us to build, quote, a private thought bubble, reading only those websites that reinforce his or her desired beliefs, which is exactly where we seem to be today. You sort of called it you were describing the internet in general, but social media seems to have just taken this to a whole new level.
I am so sorry to be right about that. There were things I saw happening that I guess in my heart hope would be warnings. But, I just wrote for small publications.
I think this was probably in Harper's, Or
That one was excerpted in Harper's.
Okay.
It originally ran in, I'm sorry, I forgive,
If we
I
wanted
forgive
more-
the publisher.
so that somehow the selfie generation missed that Harper's article, unfortunately.
Well, what are they reading?
Yeah.
They're reading feeds, you know. So the feeds are telling them what's happening today. It's very difficult, by the way, to sit and talk with you today about technology a day after we had this horrible slaughter in Las Vegas and more than 50 people killed and hundreds injured. We really don't know the extent of it. And, you know, guns are technology. Industrial design is technology. You know, we tend to think of it as just cool phones and laptops and AI servers and algorithms, but people design these this apparatus that allows a gun to become, you know, shoot hundreds of bullets with one burst, and that really stops me. You know, at days like this, it is hard to get cheerful. I mean, I'm sort of the representative of gloom in general, but this was particularly stopped me.
I think there's, I mean, looking at, it's hard for everyone to just get through the day on days like this. But one of the points you keep bringing up is that all technologies have these implicit effects and that they're not neutral. And a lot of the ethical conversations that surround all sorts of other debates about policy, about politics, social issues, tends to not happen in the technological space because engineers build it, the market asks for it, the designers build it, they ship it, and then we live with the consequences. But it seems like at every turn, whether it's gun technology, software code, access to services, we need to have that conversation about the consequences.
That would be my hope. That's why I wrote this book, hoping to initiate a conversation on different levels. You know, not what is the cool future. The future is what you make of it now, having a conversation. Human desire drives the future. That is our prerogative. Also to look to the past. Another reason I wanted to go back to the mid-90s is that we learn from the past. Just looking forward teaches you very little because that's all fantasy. But if we go back and we see how we got where we are, the trends that got us here, also the successes people had in the past, things that were learned. People lived before us, you know, and they've been working on computing technology more than, we're going into 100 years, I guess, you know, at some point, starting with the ideas about it. So that is, if anything, I would hope people would stop and educate themselves. So that's a terrible elitist thing to say, but to look back and try to see how they got where they are.
What do you think about the nature of the tech industry in terms of the size of the leaders? With Google and Amazon and Apple and Microsoft, you're talking about 4 companies that absolutely dominate entire industries: the web industry, the retail industry, the entertainment industry. Are these companies? Is there something about just being too big that creates its own problems?
The 5th one, Uber.
And Uber, we'll see how Uber is doing in 5 years.
That's a good question. I don't want to talk too much about that, but yeah, I think I was talking with Manoush Zarmodi, and we talked about Uber as the devil, and the others were the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. So, yes, they are too big. We have to live with them for a very long time. And a company like Apple portrays itself as socially progressive. However, these companies are deeply libertarian. They don't want the government controlling them, except when they want the government to pander to them. Look what's happening with all these cities begging to have Amazon come into their midst. Oh, you won't have to pay taxes for 20 years, so government helps them. That's what these companies want. They don't want regulation. I don't see in this political atmosphere how we're going to do that. We don't have a Supreme Court that's going to say, these are monopolies, we're going to break them up. This is a hard question. Yes, they're too big. Many people have to address what we do from here.
Yeah. Do you think that what is the problem with them? Because they're companies. I've never seen a private company that has asked for more regulation. Like they all, because they're there for shareholders and to drive their profits. But what's the risk of having these big giant companies? Is it that they're going to use their market power to exploit consumers? Is it that they're not going to innovate because they've got essentially monopolies in all these different industries?
Well, they're going to exploit consumers. We're going to have more surveillance. There's more competition. I think they can't just sit back and say, I'm not doing R&D, I'm not reaching out. But I'm afraid a lot of that is coming from buying other companies. So startups have these ideas and then they're purchased. And then I think they kind of they dissolve their exciting powers, if they have any, in these larger corporations. But these corporations cannot sit back and do nothing. Look what happened to Microsoft. It really fell behind. Look at Intel. Intel used to be one of the giants. Now it's completely, as we no longer use big computers and laptops have different chips and they don't contribute at all to mobiles. So yes, they're going to have to innovate. I hope they don't do it by just buying other people's companies and then diluting the effects of those companies, which seems to be happening.
You have an essay about the millennium bug, which most people are going to have to Google to find out what it was. But I was telling you before we went on air that I was actually in a newsroom on New Year's Eve in 1999, and no one really knew what was going to happen. Like we knew personal computers would probably be okay, but everyone was sort of worried about what happens in the power plant with that computer in the back room that nobody's checked on in 10 years. But can you talk a little bit about what happened then and then what lessons that may hold for us today?
One of the things that was wonderful about that is that I met programmers who had written this code in the 60s who said, I never expected this code would be living this long. And testers, and these are really devoted people. The company Texaco was the only big corporation that was willing to go public to say, this is not a hoax. This is what we're doing. These are the problems we're facing. And their efforts were heroic. And there were small local things that were not publicized. But I knew in my heart, talking to these dedicated programmers and project leaders, that this was going to be okay, because they were really planning. Now the lesson for us now is we're still using all this old code. We've got these flashy front ends, and then you've got the internet, which is really under stress. Okay, that is very old code. The reason we're having all these hacks is that the internet was never designed for privacy and anonymity. It was designed to be collegial and open. No one built in the idea that there'd be these thundering hordes. So we have a vulnerability there. We go back to the servers doing algorithms. That's on an operating system called Linux. Linux goes way back. So if you go deeper and deeper into what's behind the pretty stuff, you find old code, old code, old code. And programmers write stuff that rides on top of the other code and often do not understand the details of the stuff they're interfacing with. So the lesson lives on.
Excellent. I want to talk to you a little bit about AI, because it seems like we've in this position with the internet, which has all these unintended consequences that we're still trying to sort out. And now we're birthing this entirely new technology, which has all these implications. And you go to a lot of companies and they have AI systems that are running, that are making business decisions and making recommendations that they literally can't figure out how they got there. They can't identify the process that reached that conclusion. They just know it works. Can you talk a little bit about what that might mean?
The trend right now in AI, the whole idea of a humanoid robot we can't tell from a human being has really gone by the wayside, because it proves that it seems that it's very, very hard to understand how human beings function the way they do. It's now machine learning. The idea is that you write an algorithm, it looks at the results, and it changes itself, and then looks at the results, and it learns. Now what happens is the people who wrote that original algorithm really don't know what happens after several iterations. And the code moves farther and farther away from the people who understand it. So it is kind of I guess it's a monster, in a sense that it operates on its own. And yes, it works, but what is it missing? It works on data that has bias. It has a bias, first of all, of the past. There are errors. So what it's learning from is also biased and error-prone. I do worry about AI in that regard, especially the idea of self-driving cars. And now we're talking about actual human harm. And I could talk too long about that, so I better stop.
Most of the forecasts say that the self-driving cars will be safer than human drivers, which I feel like human drivers are a big part of the problem on the roads today.
Okay, human drivers have a 100-year history driving cars. So here's what humans can do. They don't just look at the proximity around them. You know when you're driving, even if you're inattentive, if you have some experience, you can see ahead of you, quarter mile, half mile up a hill, that it's all congested, and you're going to have to get ready to stop. You can read the personality of cars. Someone comes on the far lane over there, you see the make, the model, the aggressiveness of the driver. When that car moves, you know it's going to cut you off. You don't wait for a proximity alarm. Human beings know in ways that, in a flash, that either I'm going to have a crash, or I'm going to get into a road rage with this car, or I'm going to say, okay, go on. Now, let's go to the ways that self-driving cars can crash. Again, they're relying on machine-to-machine interfaces. And there's going to be bugs in that code, period. So, okay, then they're going to be communicating over the internet or some wireless network. Big vulnerability there. We've seen that cars operating on wireless have already been hacked by white hat hackers to show, look, I can make your car drive off the road. So how is that protected? And then there's the interface between different makes and models. Now, do you think that everyone's going to be driving a Prius? No, humans want different sort of performance. So there'll be competition, again, into how cars operate, how the driver or the occupants want to feel when they're on the road. So there'll be some kind of standard API, application interface, which are famously error-prone, because people say, okay, this is what you implement, but their implementations behind that are always subtly different. So there are many, many points of failure that can happen there. Also, they can't drive in the snow.
There's that.
There's that.
So
is it going to be useless?
Do you think? Do you think that that we're going to have self-driving cars? They're just going to be very error-prone and security risks, or that you don't think that we can actually build a safe self-driving car, and that the technology is going to take much longer than people think?
I think it will happen. I think in limited access roadways like freeways, it's going to work real well. Unless it's snowing or there's heavy rain, it has to see the lines. Mm-hmm. And it has to see the brake lights and the lights of the cars around it. And so with limited viewpoints, they're adding other LiDAR and so forth. Eventually it will work. It will take a little longer. Right now, I think there are some towns that are building an infrastructure in the town center for the cars. Now, that's great. Now, we're here in Manhattan. Now, we're having trouble keeping our subways running. Do you think we're going to take billions of dollars to turn Manhattan into a place that has sensors for self-driving cars? I don't know, hundreds of years from now? If Manhattan hasn't been flooded from the rising seas, it will be there. But I think the euphoria, as usual, I'm the gloom representative, and I feel like I'm on a seesaw, and there's everybody else, that really knows what they're, and I'm like a flea bouncing on the other end, trying to push down a little bit and level out the viewpoints and sort of temper our the excitement needs to be there, but temper the expectations. Know the work, the hard work we need to do before that wonderful expectation can be fulfilled.
All right, well, I'm going to ask you a couple questions that I ask everybody that comes on the show. This one should be an easy one for you. What technological trend most concerns you? Is there anything that keeps you up at night?
All
We
of
could
the
do a whole
above,
other
all
show.
of the above. It doesn't keep me up at night. I mean, I spend enough time thinking about it during the day. I know one of the questions I think you intended to ask was, should people take a pause from all these? Yes. So I just almost got thrown into the street by somebody coming by on a scooter
And a phone?
with earbuds and a phone. So this really concerns me. People could really get hurt, like me. I don't
People
want
do
to
get
fall.
hurt.
People
People
get
get
hurt.
hit every day in New York City because everybody's looking at their phone and they're walking.
Yeah, I live in the South of Market area. I'm based in San Francisco, and it's Startup Alley, 2nd Street. Now, it's one thing to say everyone's looking at their phone, but when you try to walk down the street headed north when everyone's headed south, and 100 people are looking into their phones, it really is like, I feel like I'm living in an alien world, but that's what's going to happen. I want to say something a little, I don't know if it's interesting, that just happened to me today. I, of all days, forgot my phone today.
Wow.
And I put it precisely in the same place and was in a rush. And so I wanted to, when you were going to ask, should people get away, I thought of a line from the Duino Elegies that's about someone walking down the street and someone's playing a violin that you can hear outside from an open window, and the line is, a violin was playing for you, were you ready to receive it? That sense of just openness on the street. And I thought, okay, I'm going to have to introduce the name of the poet, which I could not remember for the life of me.
It's okay, we can Google it.
So, right, but I didn't have my phone. So I thought, oh God, how am I going to do this? I thought, I'll back off. And then there was this guy at the corner trying to flag down tourists, Any questions, any questions? So I walked up to him and said, do you happen to know the author of the Duino Elegies? And then I walked along looking at people, and I think, who among all of these people in busy Manhattan Street might know who wrote the Duino Elegies? And then I thought, well, who could I ask, may I use your phone?
Mm-hmm.
And it was just a whole exercise, in a big detour into thinking these other thoughts, which could be an opening to a novel, a short story, an essay, or just one of those piece of junk thoughts that people tend to have. And then, of course, having backed off and thought about all of that, I took one step, and Rilke came. So this is why I felt at that moment happy I didn't have my phone.
There's something to be said for not having a distraction in your hand. I mean, when I was a kid, my mom used to limit my television time, and now I can watch TV anytime I want. It's in my pocket, and I can always play a video game, and I can always read something. It's like those moments of non-stimulation you have to carve them out for yourself, because you're not going to get them if you just go about your life like everybody else does.
I have as many YouTube noir movies as I can find, and I am sort of addicted when nothing's happening in my life to watching them. But it's not true that nothing is ever happening in your life. Boredom is a bad thing, but waiting sometimes, unless you're in a rush and you have to get things done, everyone hates standing in line. But sometimes you just stand there and things come to you. You look at the people, different thoughts enter your mind. But I'm as addicted as anyone else. I stay off Twitter and I use Facebook sparingly. I don't want to be interrupted, but email is a little devil. It's got a pitchfork saying, check me, check me.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm as subject to that as anybody.
Let me ask you, is there any technology in particular that still inspires wonder in you that you use every day that just makes your life better?
Now, I know you asked that question.
Mm-hmm.
And
obviously not your phone, because it's not
my phone. I wish I could say that I still felt that wonder and excitement when I wrote my first working program. I wish I could say that. And I'm encouraging other people to do it. I'm trying to help them imagine the wonder and the pleasure. I've been thinking about this, I think, a long time. And I fear that that's kind of eroded my excitement. And I think that will be a project for me to find out what in there still gives me pleasure and excitement.
All right. Well, hopefully PC Mag will help you on that quest a little bit, because
Sure.
we do review cover some cool stuff. Ellen, thanks so much for coming by today.
Absolutely my pleasure. I enjoyed it.
I appreciate it. Ellen Ullman, everybody. I'm gonna plug the book one more time, Life in Code. Check it out. I bought the hardcover copy, but you can also get an ebook, of course. And that's Fast Forward for today. Thanks so much for joining us. If you want to hear past episodes of Fast Forward, you can find them on pcmag.com. You can also find them on Apple Podcasts, on Google Play, and everywhere else that fine podcasts are given away for free. Thanks so much for joining us today. I'll see you in the future.